In this video, I will introduce you to the method of audio content analysis that we will be using in our final assessment. The purpose of analysing audio programs in this way is to identify production ideas that work effectively, ideas that we might go on to use in our own productions, and to really focus our listening in a way that enables us not only to identify and deconstruct production details, but to help remember and consolidate our knowledge of good audio practice. In addition to this practical purpose, the written aspect demonstrates how to write good analysis and critical study documents that are strongly tied to evidence in the program material itself. To achieve this, we are going to use Pro Tools as an analysis tool, taking advantage of the marker and memory locations and Pro Tools' ability to export session information as text. The program we will analyse is entitled The Sailor's Walk from the ABC Radio's History Listen program, broadcast on Tuesday the 30th of January 2018. The program was produced by Ros Blewett, the sound engineer was Russell Stapleton, and it is narrated by historian Mark McKenna with naturalist John Blay, museum curator John Addison, and actor Aaron Geiger. We will follow a template model to complete the analysis. The analysis model is divided into three main parts. The first section provides an overview or summary of the program material, including a brief synopsis or outline identifying the main theme or focus of the program, a summary of the structure or main sections of the program, comment on the cultural, historical, geographical or political context, both internal to the program and in terms of its production and dissemination, identification of the main characters or agents in the program, which might be both human or non-human, and finally, comment on the program type, considering the typical form of audio programs such as narrative, drama, documentary, interview, or hybrid types, including radiophonic art. This section will usually require 100 to 200 words to cover the main points. The second part uses evidence from the program material itself. You can use Pro Tools markers or memory locations to identify and record the location of specific content in the program material that can be used to support your interpretation of the program. We call this audio content analysis, and there are specific kinds of audio content that we're looking for. One way of categorizing audio content is to divide it into dialogue, music, sound effects, and atmospheres. This approach follows aspects of the production methods applied in developing soundtracks for film and television, in which different personnel are tasked with producing these types of content, and they are brought together in what are sometimes called stems to complete the final mix. Once we have identified the content, we can move on to consider the structure of the audio program in terms of horizontal, vertical, spatial, or spectral structures. Horizontal structure refers to the timeline as a horizontal line through the program in which major events occur, such as introduction, major plot points, transitions, changes of scene, or other structural events. The vertical structure describes the density of the texture, or the number of separate sound elements that are playing at a given time. This will usually change throughout the program, and often contrasts in vertical structure or density mark turning points in the horizontal structure. The spatial structure identifies the use of foreground and background and the use of stereo and reverberation to create a sense of depth and width. Even monoprograms can achieve depth by using audio perspective, either in the mixing or recording stages. Spectral structure considers the use of the frequency spectrum throughout the program. Many radio programs focus mainly on the middle of the spectrum, where the human voice is located, and by doing this, they allow the program to sound good on small speakers. Music and film soundtracks often exploit the deep bass and high treble to create contrast and engagement with the soundtrack. The The third and final stage in the analysis is to create an overall evaluation of the program, identifying novel or interesting ideas in the production, sound design and composition, and to consider the strengths and weaknesses of the program as a whole. Having completed a thorough content analysis, you will be in a good position to support your evaluation with specific elements in your observations of the soundtrack itself, thus moving beyond mere subjective opinion and moving towards an objective account of the material. As I mentioned earlier, this analysis approach is intended both to give you ideas for developing your projects and to enhance your awareness and listening skills in working with audio media. I'm now going to talk through the analysis method step by step. First, create a Pro Tools session. Now, import your audio into Pro Tools and load it into a new track. Make sure you can see the Markers track in the time ruler. Choose the Minutes and Seconds ruler as your main time ruler, then select Show Main Ruler Only, and then add the Markers ruler. You might like to zoom in and expand the track width so you can see the waveform more clearly. The first step is to listen through the entire program, taking notes as you listen, with a view to developing your overview or synopsis, identifying the main theme, structure, describing the content, main characters or agents, and identifying the program type. Use the analysis template to guide your notes. Once you have listened through, take a moment to fill your rough notes out and turn them into joined-up sentences. Here's what I wrote. The Sailor's Walk is a radio feature program based on historical research about an event in early Australian colonial history, involving a group of shipwrecked sailors and crew walking up the east coast of Australia to Sydney in the 1790s. It includes dramatised accounts based on a journal kept by one of the sailors, including descriptions of their first contact interactions with Indigenous people along the way. These are framed by voiceover and location interview material presented by the historians involved in the research. Once you have practiced the next steps, you can also use this first pass listen to enter Pro Tools markers. In the next phase, you will be identifying specific events in the audio program using markers or memory locations. You can display the memory locations window to help you navigate through the program using the markers you create. You enter markers by pressing the Enter key on the numeric keypad or function Return on a laptop. Click on the marker in the memory locations window to jump to that location. Note that the analysis template uses a set of codes for identifying features in the program. These codes will be used later in the analysis to assist your write-up. The codes for content categories are DIAL for dialogue, MUS for music, ATM for atmospheres, SFX for sound effects. The codes for structure are struct for the main sectional divisions in the program, DENS, dense, for notable changes in texture or density of the mix, SPAT, for contrasts in or interesting uses of spatial width, depth, perspective or reverberation, and finally SPECT, for notable contrasts in or interesting uses of the frequency content in the program. These codes are used as a prefix to the markers you enter. Give each marker a unique name and enter any useful notes in the comments field. There are several approaches to completing this phase of the content analysis, depending on the amount of time you have. If you have plenty of time, focus on one aspect of the program at each pass, playing through and listening to the program. Start by identifying the main structural divisions in the program and enter struct markers to mark transitions from the introduction to the main program or major shifts in scene, location, time, or other main sections. This is similar to marking the start of a verse, chorus, or bridge sections in a song. Now go through and identify significant uses of the different content types. Using the dial prefix, identify the different uses of dialogue, such as voiceover, narration, interview, or character voices. Using the mus prefix, mark the use of music in the program. Identify the use of atmospheres and specific sound effects using their prefixes in your marker text. Make a note of the function of these sounds in the comment section of the marker's dialog box. For example, you might note that a particular music cue sets the scene in a particular time period or geographical location. You might note a particularly detailed stereo atmosphere sets the scene by describing a location and produces spatial contrast to mark the transition from a narrated exposition to a dramatized scene. In this example, you might have 3 separate markers: a structural marker, a spat spatial marker, and an ATM atmosphere marker. This points to the fact that once you get good at identifying features, you can move from separate passes focusing on specific elements to entering the different sound types and structural markers concurrently. You will need at least 3 or 4 passes through the material to get good coverage in your content analysis. You might find yourself jumping through the markers to add detail to the comments in a particular category of sounds. For example, once you have a better idea of the overall structure of the piece, you will be able to describe the structural divisions more clearly. You might also be able to figure out a clever strategy that the program maker employed throughout the program to deploy sound in a way that helps tell the story in a non-obvious way, such as through the use of different types of edits or different audio content types in different sections of the program. By now, you will have a lot of information about the content and structure of the program. This information will now be put to good use in your write-up of the analysis. Pro Tools allows us to export our marker text so that it can be imported into Microsoft Word. From the File menu, select Export Session Data. Choose Export Session Data as text. The only information we need is the time locations and the marker text. Deselect the other items in the dialog box and click Export as Text. By default, the text file will be saved to your session folder. In the Finder, right-click or Control-click on the text file and select Open with Microsoft Word. Accept the defaults in the File Conversion dialog. Now delete everything in the file except the table of markers. Type Command-A to select all the text in the file. We are now going to convert the file to a table so that we can sort the text. From the Table menu, select Convert Text to Table. The text is divided into table cells at the tab characters that Pro Tools places in the fields. We can remove the time reference and units column by selecting some text in the columns and selecting the Table Delete Columns menu item. We now have a table showing the marker number, location in minutes and seconds, marker name, and comments. Notice that all our marker names have code prefixes. This will allow us to organize the markers according to their categories. Place your cursor in the table and then select the Table Sort menu item. Click the button for My List Has Header Row. Then select Sort by Name from the drop-down list. Notice that our table is now sorted by marker code, but the time locations are all mixed up. Word won't recognize the time format with a colon, so we'll replace the colon with a full stop so that Word treats the time locations as decimal numbers. Select the Edit, Find, Replace menu item, enter a colon in the Find field, and a full stop in the Replace field. Select Replace All. Now, because of a bug in Microsoft Word for Mac, we have to split our table between each of the codes and sort for time location. Select the first cell containing the next code. In this case, that's the first dialog entry. Then select the Table Split Table menu item. Now sort by location as number and repeat this for each new code. Once you have sorted the tables, you can convert them back to text by selecting the Table Convert to Text menu item or leave it in table format. This technique sounds a bit complicated, but it can be really useful for creating spotting lists for effects and dialogue replacement in post-production for film and television. Once you learn to think of Office software as a production tool, you will discover lots of uses for Microsoft Word, Excel, and Google Docs, as well as for collaboration on production tasks. Now organize the text in the order suggested by the analysis template and start to build your written analysis. Here in the Sailor's Walk program, we note that there are various forms of dialogue. This also gives us our list of main characters. I'll note in my write-up that, as a documentary radio program, the voice is primarily used as a means of delivering information. The program is framed by a studio voiceover introducing the name and content of the program. Importantly, much of the voice material is presented either recorded on location or mixed to sound as if it is recorded on location. The main speaker is the historian Mark McKenna, who we first meet on the coast in the New South Wales Royal National Park. In his opening monologue, he provides an exposition on the focus of the program. The second use of voice is dialogue between McKenna and the museum curator John Addison, starting at 2 minutes 52 seconds, in which they discuss relevant parts of the collection of the Queen Victoria Museum in Launceston. Dialogue is also used in the form of conversation recorded on location between McKenna and the second main character, naturalist John Blay, starting at 8 minutes and 16 seconds. A third use of voice is in the dramatized scenes that illustrate the events in the diary, for example, Man Overboard at 3 minutes 51. Finally, the actor's voice is used to read extracts from the diary, for example, at 6 minutes 48 seconds. The next content type in our analysis template is music. Using my MUS Music Marker category, I review the use of music in the program as follows. Music has at least 4 main functions in the program. The first music heard is the program series theme, identifying this program as part of a related series in the ABC History Listen program. The music is followed closely by the announcer's introduction. These elements are not part of the actual program, but merely signal its place within the programming structure of the station. At 10 seconds in, the program starts with an introductory jig or reel, played on lute and flute. Later, we will understand that this music signals the program's historical 18th century subject matter and its link to British maritime colonial endeavours. A closely related set of music cues are linked to this opening theme. At 2 minutes and 26 seconds, a related music cue with a melancholy theme played on the flute signals a shift in the narrative related to the drama of a sea voyage. A number of related music cues, performed on lute and flute, mark transitions in scene or mood. A third music element signals the presence of the local Indigenous people. Brief musical cues performed with clapsticks, vocals, and didgeridoo stand in for the Indigenous people referred to in the story. This situating of voiceless Indigenous people, replaced by musical effects, reflects the historicising that must be negotiated in a program of this nature. The use of didgeridoo as a signifier is effective, though historically and geographically inaccurate, in representing the people of the southeast of Australia in the 1790s. An Indigenous vocal music cue occurs at 6 minutes. At 20 minutes, A didgeridoo-like synthetic drone suggests the menace of the armed Indigenous people met at this location in the narrative. Over the next minute, additional synthetic sound elements add to the musical texture, building tension around the violent conflict in this part of the story. Towards the end of the program, at around 26 minutes and 42 seconds, a blending of clapsticks, flute, plus vocal suggest a concluding musical resolution integrating the past with the present. The program plays out with a flute and lute cue that fades to reverb at the end. Next up in our analysis is the use of atmospheres. Here's what I extracted from my marker notes. Atmospheres are used effectively to anchor the narrative in time and location. Importantly, the Australian coastal landscape effectively becomes a character through its insistent presence in the soundtrack. Stereo recordings of the beach, ocean, bird life, and bush punctuate transitions in the program. The interior atmosphere of the museum during the interview at 2 minutes and 40 seconds situates the listener imaginatively in the museum and provides an effective contrast, transporting the listener away from the preceding coastal location. Ocean beach waves at 25 minutes and 30 seconds anchor the following narration to the location of the rescue scene, and 18th century city sounds of horse and carriage at 26 minutes bring us imaginatively into old Sydney town. The last content type is sound effects. Here's my account of this aspect of the program. Sound effects are used effectively to illustrate aspects of the fateful sea voyage and shipwreck. At 2 minutes and 16 seconds, ropes and a ship's bell set the scene. Over the next minute and a half, the addition of waves breaking and an increase in the tempo of these effects signals the rising storm. Thunder sounds mark the climax of this sequence. At 4 minutes 30 seconds, the sound of rowlocks vividly illustrates the longboat. There are several classes of sound effects in the sound design of this program. Throughout the program, waves and coastal sounds are superimposed on stereo atmospheres to enhance their impact and immediacy. At 6 minutes, footsteps in bush are used both to illustrate the scene, but also to suggest that the narrative or story time is continuing while the voiceover narration goes on. This ability to present two orders of time simultaneously is one of the key affordances of audio. Footsteps as a class of sounds are used at various points to indicate features in the landscape: sand at around 7 minutes, water at 13 minutes, grass at 21 minutes 22 seconds. Animal sounds are also used throughout the program. At 6 minutes and 6 seconds, a whipbird signals the richness of the natural environment. A dingo howl at 6 minutes and 44 seconds adds a slightly ominous feel. Crows at 11 minutes 25 seconds suggest a more threatening mood in the landscape. Crows again at 23 minutes and 23 seconds seem to stand in for the aggressive Indigenous people at this point in the narrative. The crows are perhaps an unfortunate sonic cliché, but they are deployed effectively here. The close-mic'd sounds of pen on paper are used to transform the actor's reading of Clark's journal into a fully embodied presence in the story. Another indexical sound are the axe sounds, pointing to the presence of the local people and their lives going on in the background. One sound sits on the border between the categories of music and sound effects, and that is the use of clapsticks, presented with and without other musical sounds at 6 minutes, 13 minutes and 16 seconds, 19 minutes 49 seconds, and 26 minutes and 43 seconds. Next, we move on to the analysis of structural details. Note that I have recorded entries only for horizontal structure and spatial effects. More could be said about vertical structure or changes in density of the program. At this point, I am prompted to go back and try to identify the specific sections or scenes in the program. I already have the markers. I'll just go through and identify them more clearly, then copy them from the table and insert them into the document. I'll convert the table to text by selecting the Table, Convert Table to Text menu item. I'll choose to separate the text in each cell with a space character. Then I'll remove the empty spaces in the text using the Edit, Find, Replace dialog. First, copy the text to be replaced, in this case, a series of spaces. Then, paste it into the Find field and select Replace All. Notice that I have the Show Non-Printing Characters selected to show up the spaces and paragraph marks. Here is the list of scenes or sections and my write-up. The horizontal structure is divided into sections of dialogue between the two main characters McKenna and Blay, and dramatised readings from Clark's journals. The main dramatic episodes are the voyage and shipwreck, starting at 2 minutes and 16 seconds, and conflict with the Indigenous people, starting at 19 minutes 49 seconds. Another main structural event is the interview at the museum in Launceston. There are 32 separate sequences ranging from 10 seconds of dialogue to longer two-way discussions of up to 3 minutes in length. The average sequence is about 1 minute long. The overall program length is 28 minutes and 22 seconds. Notable use of spatial effects occur at 6 minutes and 44 seconds, where a sort of spatial hyperrealism is conjured by juxtaposing the distant reverberant dingo with the ultra-close-mic'd pen and paper. It is also hyperreal because Clark reads and writes simultaneously, placing us both within his head and observing his actions. The use of wide stereo atmospheres are effective throughout. The transition from exterior space to the reverberant interior of the Launceston Museum at 2 minutes and 41 seconds is also an effective cue for change of scene. The final step is to provide a concluding summary or evaluation that weighs up the strengths and weaknesses of the program, design, or composition. For our assessment task, we will want to draw in ideas from our audio culture's readings to firmly link our analysis in the scholarship of sound. Here is my attempt at this. Conclusion. The program uses sound effects and atmospheres to maintain several temporal layers simultaneously. Rapid sonic transitions are made from the present tense narration to an intermediate time of several interviews with the experts on the topic, and to the time of the narrative itself, which is presented in a dramatized performance. A continual anachronic presentation is only made possible by this use of signaling effects, music, atmospheres, and characterized voices. Music is used sparingly to give a sense of mood, a jig on a flute and lute for positive aspects of the story, a didgeridoo-like drone and vocals for dramatic conflict between the main character and some of the local Indigenous people. Sound, particularly signalling devices such as pen on paper, a dramatized voiceover performance, and musical elements, are used to draw the listener into the drama of the historical narrative. Clever scripting or editing reveals the narrator's enthusiasm for the subject matter and demonstrates the significance of the story to a contemporary audience by suggesting that it reveals a hidden event in First Contact Australia, showing the potential complexity of these interactions. The psychological distance between the narrators and the historical Clark are reduced by having them share enthusiasms and by echoing the same readings almost simultaneously. This kind of psychological parallelism is very difficult to achieve in text alone, and is one of the great advantages of audio, exploited effectively in this program. The Indigenous people in the story are not given an actual voice, but their participation in the story is represented by sounds, such as clapsticks, and is interpreted by the narrators. The program walks an uneasy line in representing the Indigenous Australian perspective. Rather than consulting Indigenous people within the program content, it relies on the expertise of the interpreting white Australian historian. In some respects, this is understandable, as the focus is on the authentic historical document of Clark's journal. However, the historically inaccurate use of the didgeridoo as a signifier of the Indigenous people's presence is somewhat compromising. Two long pieces of dialogue between the narrators, apparently made in situ on the location of the story, introduce an interesting meta-narrative about the act of historical interpretation, thus adding another temporal layer to the program. Now, tidy up the document by moving the marker tables to the end and adding the heading Appendix Memory Location Markers. That concludes the analysis process. As I explained at the outset, the purpose of analysing audio programs in this way is to identify production ideas that work effectively and to really focus our listening in a way that enables us to identify and deconstruct important production details. You can apply this approach to music production analysis as well. The written aspect demonstrates how to write good analysis and critical study documents that are strongly tied to evidence in the program material itself. A bonus is that the use of Microsoft Word and the Pro Tools marker text shown in the video can be used to speed up the creation of production documentation and to improve its accuracy. That concludes the video on audio content analysis.